Facing cancer doesn't mean you are now only the cancer patient. So often we hear those with cancer share the need to feel seen, to feel understood, and not feel alone. So whether you are facing cancer yourself or supporting someone who is, join us. My name is Susan Larkin. We are Facing Cancer Together. Going through treatment, there can be so many extra sources of stress, including food and nutrition. Listening to Registered Dietitian Denise Gabrielson, along with the personal experiences of our special guests, will hopefully help take some of that stress off your plate. Let's first hear from two of our guests, Michelle Sylvain and Maureen Holloway, on nutrition during treatment. Here's Maureen Holloway.
There's no conspiracy. Everybody wants us to get better and we've made tremendous strides. And yeah, maybe willow bark will make you feel better, but there's no reason to think it's going to cure you. And that probably happens a little bit to everybody who gets diagnosed. Some well-meaning person says, if you eat a plant-based diet, I had a young woman tell me that, had I eaten the plant-based diet, none of this would have happened to me.
And now let's hear from Michelle Sylvain.
And you compare yourself to other people sometimes, which you should never do, but you look at some people that you know, and this person smokes every day and eats like crap, and here I am eating quinoa, and I've always been so conscious of everything that I was trying to put healthy things in my body, and here I am, don't smoke, barely drink, but you can't do that because you drive yourself crazy.
Let's now go to my chat with Registered Dietitian Denise Gabrielson.
So my name is Denise. I'm a registered dietitian, and I have worked in oncology for almost 16 years now. I have a special interest in malnutrition and nutrition screening, and also nutrition education. I've done a lot of work with My Gut Feelings, the Stomach Cancer Foundation of Canada, and I also am the co-chair for the Dietitians of Canada Oncology Network.
Amazing. Welcome. Let's jump in. Tell me, why is nutrition important while going through cancer treatment?
So there's lots of reasons that nutrition is really important during treatment. One of the main things is that we know that people who have trouble with their nutrition or who are malnourished during treatment have a more difficult time during treatment in terms of side effects, energy levels. One of the things, or many of the things that can be of help with eating well, it can preserve muscle mass. It helps you stay strong during treatment. It helps with treatment-related fatigue. So that's a very common side effect that people face. It can help to rebuild damaged tissues that can happen with chemotherapy or radiation or surgery. It can also help to reduce the risk of infection or help to reduce the severity of treatment-related side effects or surgical complications. It can also help maintain people's quality of life.
What do you mean by that?
So, there's a big psychological component to eating well. I think that if people feel that they have control over what they're eating, sometimes that can be of benefit. Also, in terms of energy levels, when people have low energy, they also feel that their well-being is very low. So staying well-nourished can help people to have a better sense of well-being.
Mm-hmm. And so you were talking about helping with fatigue, maintaining muscle mass, helping keeping energy up. What are some, obviously everyone's treatment plan is different and everyone is in a unique position, but are there some general tips that you commonly are telling the people that you see?
I think the biggest tip would be to eat as well as you can during treatment. And I think that this can mean different things to different people. It depends on your cancer diagnosis. It depends on what treatment you have. But even two people who have the same cancer, who are undergoing the same treatment, can have very different experiences during treatment in terms of eating. So I think that eating as well as you can, so that could mean eating as healthfully as you can, Or it could mean just focusing on getting enough energy and protein from your foods to maintain your energy levels, or, making sure that you're getting enough nutrients from your food to prevent malnutrition. So it could mean different things to different people, but basically doing the best that you can.
And so it almost sounds like, I'm following my food groups. I'm including as many food groups as I can and really making sure I'm getting that nutrition in my body.
Yeah. So in an ideal world, if there were no side effects, we would encourage people to eat according to cancer prevention guidelines. And that's a good place to start. But also being flexible with how you eat during treatment in case there are side effects from treatment that prevent you from eating as well as you'd like to, or eating the things that you'd like to, and mainly focusing on just getting food in. It's good to have a very loose plan of how you might want to eat during treatment, but sometimes having a very specific plan can have a negative effect on emotional well-being, because when you're not able to stick with that plan, some people might feel like they're failing. Some people, might feel like they're not doing a good job, or they're not fighting hard enough during their treatment. So I think it's important to have realistic expectations of what to expect, so that you're not having those feelings of disappointment or anger during treatment because you're not able to follow things exactly how you wanted to. Or sometimes even getting advice from others can sometimes feed into that as well. So if you're not meeting the expectations of others and what they think that you should be doing during treatment, that can also lead to feelings of failure or even exclusion and loneliness.
It sounds like we should, go in with a plan, but be kind to yourself and maybe have a few versions of the plans.
Absolutely. So some contingency plans as well.
You were talking about well-meaning people giving you advice. I've also heard a couple folks mention the dangers of the internet. What do you say to your patients if they are doing some Google searching or talking to others about what their nutrition thinking might be?
I think that's a very natural response after getting a diagnosis, is you want to look for as much information as possible in order to make informed decisions about your care. It's empowering to be able to be involved in making those decisions about your own health and well-being. There's various places that you could get information. So your healthcare team, government agencies, could be support groups, friends and family often are very well-meaning. Internet could be news reports. It could be studies. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you're reading information very carefully. Look for things like red flags, like, words like miracle or breakthrough, or claims that just sound too good to be true. And understand that progression of nutritional science is very slow. So best practice really relies on more than one study showing similar results rather than just a single study showing something. So it's not really a good idea if someone says, oh, I saw this news report, like you should really eat this food or you shouldn't eat this food anymore. I heard that it's really bad. It's not really a good idea to change your diet or restrict certain foods based on one news report or a single study. Basically, news reports often focus on what seems to be controversial or conflicting results because they are new or different, or they make the news because they go against conventional wisdom. So I think reading those things with a grain of salt, and if you're unsure, bringing that information back to your healthcare team and having them maybe guide you in some of those decisions can be very helpful.
You mentioned the cancer prevention diet, if I have that correct. Where would somebody find that?
So I know the Canadian Cancer Society has some great resources on lifestyle and dietary tips for cancer prevention. Another resource is the American Institute for Cancer Research. So there's an organization called the World Cancer Research Fund, and it's a group of experts, and they review all of the best quality evidence on diet and lifestyle and cancer risk. And their recommendations come from all of that really good quality scientific evidence. So those are two places that I would go in terms of cancer prevention guidelines.
One of the side effects you were talking about is fatigue. Mm-hmm. And obviously nutrition can help play a role in mitigating some of that. But fatigue means the thought of cooking, the thought of getting to the grocery store, the thought of just preparing food can really, I want to get that food into me, but I'm just too tired to do it. What are some of the strategies or tips that you'll talk to people about?
I think it's good to understand that usually energy levels will fluctuate. I think there are some unfortunate cases in which people just feel tired all the time, but usually it'll fluctuate. So, if you're undergoing chemotherapy, for example, your treatments might be 2 weeks apart or 3 weeks apart. And so usually right at the beginning, right after treatment, you feel the most tired, and then things start to get better right before your next treatment. So, trying to do as much planning as possible when your energy levels are good, and planning for when your energy levels are really going to be low. So planning things like easy meals and snacks ahead of time, stocking your kitchen with easy to prepare foods. When your energy levels are good, maybe you want to do some batch cooking and freezing. So making things in larger portions, freezing them in individual portions so that you can just heat them up when your energy levels are low instead of cooking a meal. If you really want to cook, instead of standing at a counter to do things like cutting vegetables or preparation steps like that, maybe sitting at the kitchen table to do your cutting. Getting pre-cut produce can also really help, or using canned or frozen fruits and vegetables can help. Keeping meals simple. So, trying slow cooker meals or one pot meals or one pan meals, that decreases hands-on time needed for cooking. And it can also help to minimize the cleanup that happens after cooking. I love cooking, but I hate doing the cleanup. So things that minimize the amount of dishes you create can be really helpful as well. If it's financially feasible, meal kits could be helpful, or grocery delivery. If grocery delivery is not an option, thinking about your local grocery store, and when it's least busy, that's when you should do your grocery shopping. Having a list of groceries can often help to minimize the amount of walking that you need to do in the grocery store, so you're not wandering up and down the aisles, and you have a clear plan of what you need when you go in there.
That's great. And great advice too. I know people often say, oh, what can I do to help? And it sounds like, making some casseroles, freezing them in individual size portions, almost letting those caregivers and friends and family know how to help as well.
Yeah. So people really do want to help. And if you have that kind of community of friends and family, don't be shy to let them know your preferences, or let them know if your healthcare team has told you that there are certain foods that you should avoid, whether because of, interactions with medications that you're taking or because of food safety. And if you're someone that's wanting to provide meals for someone, so individual portions could help, or, people who are going through treatment who maybe have young children, thinking about some family friendly or kid friendly meals or snacks. When you have young kids, so much of your time is spent making meals and snacks that sometimes get eaten, sometimes don't. And when you have low energy levels, that could be a little bit tiresome. So even things that are kid friendly, that people can stick in the freezer.
Mm-hmm. You talked about food insecurity, and of course, especially right now, the costs of food are high. What are some suggestions for folks that, it could be a financially difficult time when you're going through treatment if you're not able to work or reducing your work hours? What are some things people can do to help balance out some of those challenges?
So That's a really great question, because food prices are really high, and certainly undergoing cancer treatment really does impact people's finances. I think, everyone could benefit from figuring out how to save some money at the grocery store these days. But buying local or in-season produce is often more affordable. And when things aren't in season, you can consider buying frozen or canned. That can also help to reduce spoilage and food waste. So particularly like if you're in a small family or you're living alone, you may not be able to get through some of the larger packages of fresh foods before they spoil. And that can be a lot of food waste and not very economical. So things that you can store in your freezer or pantry can be really helpful. Looking at generic brands rather than some of the more well-known brands can help. Buying canned foods when they're on sale. So if it's foods that are nutrient dense, so things like canned beans or chickpeas or lentils. These also are easy ways to add protein that don't require a lot of food preparation. Things like canned tuna or canned salmon when they're on sale are also really good options, high in protein, nutrient dense. You can often stock up on them when they're on sale. Freezing foods. So, sometimes people might not want to buy a full loaf of bread because they can't get through it before it spoils. So sticking loaves of bread in the freezer, right into the toaster works great. And then maybe thinking about the types of foods that you're choosing. So I know that a lot of people, maybe from looking on the internet or advice from friends and family, might feel the need that they have to choose everything that's organic during treatment. And so they do a complete change in their diet and say, I'm only going to eat organic during treatment. And that can be very, very expensive. So, people choose organic foods for lots of different reasons. Some people might do it because there's a perceived difference in safety of organic foods or a perceived difference in nutrient value. And so often I tell people organic doesn't necessarily mean pesticide free. It means that it's grown without the use of synthetic pesticides or from a very specific list of approved pesticides, and that the use of pesticides on organic and conventional foods have the same safety requirements. They have to meet the same safety requirements. So the levels of pesticides, organic or not, found on the surface of foods are too low to cause cancer. So it may not be necessary to buy everything organic during treatment, and that can help to save a lot of money. So some people might avoid buying fruits and vegetables because they can't afford organic, but the benefits of fruits and vegetables are high, irrespective of whether they're organic or not.
That's great. And the nutrition value doesn't change if they're frozen or if they've been canned?
So in the canning process, you can lose some of the nutritional value. There's still benefit in there, but the processing does, you do lose some of the nutrient value in that. In terms of frozen, so when you buy local and in season, it's picked at the optimal time. So that's really optimizing nutrient value. If you buy something that's off season that has to be shipped from really far away, it's not really being picked at peak time, and that really long travel time to get to your grocery store, there can be some nutrient losses during that time. So when things are not in season, frozen can actually be more nutrient rich because they're picked and flash frozen at their peak ripeness.
You just mentioned something that was really interesting to me around food safety. I'd never really thought about that. Why? It's obviously important all the time, but why even more so during treatment? And what are some of those common errors people might make?
So the reason that food safety is so important is that a lot of treatments, especially with chemotherapy, can result in your immune system not being able to fight off infection or bacteria as well as those who are not undergoing those treatments. So you become more at risk for foodborne illness or food poisoning, and for more severe effects from things like food poisoning. So some of the common things are just, washing your fruits and vegetables really well, making sure that you're cooking any meats to a safe temperature, and not eating any undercooked meats, avoiding things like foods that might have raw eggs in them, for example. So no dishes that have raw or undercooked meats as well. Making sure you're paying attention to expiry dates on food packages, making sure that you're storing your foods well. So usually we say, no leftovers beyond 3 days in the fridge. If you don't think you're going to get through it within 3 days, then put some of that in the freezer for a later date. And then, there are certain cheeses that people should avoid. So things like blue cheese or brie, even though they've got intentional mold on them, it's still a higher risk for foodborne illness.
What about after treatment? So treatment's done, and I'm guessing a lot of people want to maybe continue some of these nutrition habits that they built during treatment, or maybe they weren't able to follow them all during treatment because they weren't feeling up to all of that. What about after treatment? What are some considerations in terms of nutrition?
I think after treatment, it's good to maybe revisit, if you're feeling well, revisit some of those cancer prevention guidelines. So in terms of secondary prevention, and that means, preventing cancer recurrence or risk of another cancer after treatment, they still recommend following those cancer prevention guidelines. And I think the best way to make changes is to choose one thing at a time and maybe not do a big overhaul, because that tends to be less sustainable. So maybe choose one change, every week or so, and see how that's going. And when that's kind of built into your lifestyle, then choose another change to make. One of the things that some people expect is that right after treatment's done, they're going to bounce back and they're going to make all these changes. And everything's going to be perfect when they finish treatment. Sometimes there are some lingering effects that might make this more challenging. So it still means, even though treatment is done, being flexible, being kind with yourself, being patient with yourself is very important, especially if you've had something like surgery where maybe your digestive system has had some, changes or things have been rerouted. You might need to be patient with yourself. And some of the guidelines and flexibility that you've had during treatment may need to continue for some months after treatment. And that's okay.
And we were talking earlier about the, that internet search, and often you'll see, avoid this food, avoid that food, never eat it again. What is your take on something that's restrictive like that?
So most of these restrictive diets don't really follow the best evidence available. And I had mentioned before, kind of looking out for those red flags. So when you're looking at resources or information sources online, that's one of those red flags. Resources that villainize specific foods or villainize specific food groups and say that you should never eat those cause cancer. It's very unlikely to be true. And I think the biggest challenge with kind of sorting out cancer and diet myths is that most myths are based on some kernel of truth that has been manipulated in some way, or maybe unintentionally misconstrued. But that's what makes them so believable. So there are foods that have been associated with higher risk for cancer, but we never say that you can never, ever have these foods.
So I could still eat bacon once in a while?
Yes.
Okay. I like bacon every once
in a
while.
There's no cancer warnings on bacon packages.
Okay. Is there anything else, in your, are there any other common questions that people ask or information that you're often sharing that you think folks should hear?
I think we talk a lot about just navigating well-meaning friends and family. People have challenges with kind of how to navigate that, but they still want support from their friends and family, but maybe aren't going to take all of the advice, and figuring out how to get around those things. So, we might talk about strategies if that person's close to them and might accompany them to an appointment. Then I'll often meet together with them just to help manage expectations of caregivers or well-meaning friends and family, because often that can be a source of conflict, and there's enough going on in which we don't need that extra source of distress for people undergoing treatment. If someone offers you some piece of advice or some new kernel of information and says you should really do this, you're more than welcome to say, that's interesting. Thank you for the information. I'll consider it, or I'll discuss this with my healthcare team. And hopefully just leave it at that. Sometimes people know someone, so my coworkers, friends, brothers, aunt did such and such during treatment, and they're now cancer-free, or they didn't experience any side effects during treatment. Understanding that not everyone has the same experience, and just because one person has had one experience doesn't mean that that's going to be the same experience for everyone else.
That's interesting. We were talking earlier about how nutrition is a way the person facing cancer can get back a bit of control, but it's a way the caregivers, everyone's at such a loss of what to do. It's so natural, this instinct to kind of take charge of the nutrition as part of the caregiver.
It's also, I think, taking charge, but also it's just such a traditional way of showing someone that you care, or showing someone that you love them. Like if we think about our relationship with food, we use it for social gatherings, we use it for celebrations. When someone is sick or has a cancer diagnosis, we want to make them food. And I think that kind of ties into one of the other things that I also spend a lot of time talking about. So I've talked a lot about symptoms, but one of the big distressing factors during treatment is weight loss. So weight loss of muscle. When you're undergoing chemotherapy, you're weighed at every single visit. And part of that helps us to keep track of if you're losing weight or muscle and there are things to be concerned about, or there are symptoms that are not being well managed. Part of that's just how the medication is dosed. So we need to know the weight so the pharmacists can and doctors can dose your medications appropriately. But it's such a big source of distress for people, or the inability to gain weight after treatment can be a source of distress. If your weight is stable, but you're not yet able to gain some of that weight or muscle mass back, thinking about other measures of health as well, and maybe just not focusing so much on the numbers on the scale. So are your symptoms improving? Thinking about these other wins. Are you able to eat a little bit more than you were able to eat before? Are you enjoying more of a variety of foods that you were compared to before? Can you walk longer distances, for example, without needing to rest? Can you handle more people visiting in the home without feeling so fatigued? So these are other measures of health that can provide some wins for you during or after treatment, rather than being so focused on the numbers on the scale.
And I would think too, listening to you, it's comparing maybe to what I did yesterday, but more about what was it last week, over a longer period of time, not this morning to this afternoon.
Yes, absolutely. So looking at longer trends over time and kind of like what direction are you going in? And knowing that, with the fluctuations in energy level, there's also fluctuations in symptoms, like things like taste changes and nausea. And maybe knowing that before, it did get better.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't, so, people can know exactly what they're supposed to eat, but if they're in pain or they have nausea, they're not able to do those things. So, tapping into your healthcare team to say, my symptoms are not well managed, and working with them to see how those symptoms can be improved to allow you to eat how you want to eat, or how you should be eating, or how you feel you should be eating.
Thank you so much, Denise. This has been such a great conversation, and so happy to have some of those resources as well as your insights to share with everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.
Denise mentions looking at trends over time. In our next episode, two powerhouse women look back almost 20 years sharing their cancer experiences while juggling high-profile media careers. Please share the Facing Cancer Together podcast with anyone in your life facing a cancer diagnosis or caring for someone who is. And if you're interested in learning more about Look Good, Feel Better and our workshops, visit us at lgfb.ca.
This is Story Studio Network.